I want to talk to you today about prophecy, the nature of prophecy. I want to talk about one of the greatest prophets, Moses in the Old Testament, walked up the mountain and got a chance to see God. Now, prophecy we often think of in terms of just the future, what is being told from God to the prophet. But in this case, Moses is being given the very law of God, the way all human beings should govern their affairs in relationship to God and to each other. And so this is a significant aspect of prophecy that is largely ignored. We are looking for the prophets to tell us the future, but God is not a fortune teller. He's not even interested in fortune telling. And so when he gives a future word through a prophet, that's a unique situation. And yet we treat it like that's the commonality. If someone has a gift of prophecy today, we're looking for them to tell us the future. And I think this is not only a wrong focus, it's dangerous. So I want to talk about the modern prophets and what they have to say in relationship to this idea. Now, when Moses was on the mountain and saw God, his face shone so much that it intimidated all of the people that he came down to talk to. And they were quite concerned. And so for a time, Moses put a veil over his face to protect the people from the glory of God that shone from his face. The problem is that like prophets today, they will get a word from God. They will have this encounter and they will hear something directly from God. And instead of relying on what God said alone, they rely on their reputation after that fact. And so a prophet will get a word, he'll report faithfully that word, and he will hear from God. And it will come true. And the problem that people have is that they, like Moses, put the veil over their face in order to keep the people from noticing that the glory of God has faded. Now, I want to point out that Moses was not thrown on the dust pile of history after the glory faded from his face, nor are the prophets individually or as people being discarded because they don't hear the same thing that follows up on their original prophecy. So what you have is you have someone who heard a word and faithfully reported, but then because they feel they need to protect their reputation, they continue on in their spiritual walk with God and even stay close to God, but God's not speaking the same way. But in order to convince their audience, they have got a reputation. They've even built maybe a ministry on the fact that they had a successful word from God. And as a result, lots of people are listening to them and they're expecting them to prophesy. And they do. Only it's no longer the word of God. It's now conjecture. It's based on good guess based on available facts. And so they continue to say, "Thus saith the Lord," when the Lord's not really speaking the same way. The Lord is still close to them, mind you. I'm not saying that they have no relationship with God, but they need to go back to the scriptures. That's why there was a school of prophets in the Old Testament, because these people would study what God had said and speak the words that God had already said through another prophet perhaps or whatever. But the problem we have with prophets echoing each other today, which is a real problem, is that they don't know who's got a veil on. I would say there are a number of people who have been real prophets who are now false prophets, and that's a problem. Okay, so looking at the whole situation then, what we see is that prophets today, when given a word, because God is not for fortune telling, are not given a word for no reason. So whenever you hear a prophecy being uttered, you need to ask yourself, why would God choose to reveal that? And there are reasons. Part of the reason for prophecy that the Bible gives is that after the fact, we may not actually understand the prophecy before the fact. But after the fact, we recognize that God has shown us this, and therefore our faith is built in who he is, not in who an individual prophet is. And so I would say to the prophets out there, this is something we all have to guard against. This is not something unique to you. It's not something unique to any particular individual. It's the human failing that we want to be respected. We want to have a ministry. And we have to trust God to give us that platform. And God may have started off giving you a platform. And we have to be very careful saying, "Thus saith the Lord." So I'm going to suggest to you that all prophecy today follows a biblical template. Something God has already said. He's verifying with what has gone before. This way, God gives a word for the end times, and it's already been established. It's not something that you've created out of whole cloth. When Jesus came, he came and fulfilled prophecy. Thousands of prophecies have spoken of him as the Messiah, and they are very specific and very concrete. And as a result, it can be said of him, as he said of himself, he said, "In the volume of the book it is written of me." He expounded on the road to Emmaus all the things concerning the things that the prophets had said to those disciples who joined him on that walk. And they were amazed, because after the fact, they could see it. Before the fact, it was very clouded in mystery, and it was very unrecognizable. And God says of himself, "It is the glory of God to conceal a thing. It's the honor of kings to search it out." So this is really what I want to leave you with, is that the nature of prophecy follows templates. It follows things that God has already said, and God fulfills those things and extends those things. Now, I do want to mention one other thing. I've mentioned before the significance of the number 2, how that in Hebrew, the very presence of a letter twice makes it go to the ultimate extreme. That this, every time God speaks something and he really wants to emphasize it, he says it twice. "Verily, verily, I say unto you." The truth of that is what he is emphasizing. And so when we see these things happen in the Bible, we have to pay particular attention when you see something happen twice. What happens when God does something twice? Well, what we're dealing with here is we can talk about the nature of the Hebrew language as something called duochromaticism. That is, that it has an immediate fulfillment in the prophecy, and then it has a long-term fulfillment. That's pretty commonly accepted by most biblical scholars, that this is the way God speaks, and it's how he validates his prophets, by having an immediate fulfillment and a long-term fulfillment. And so the duochromatic nature, or basically the idea that when God speaks, something is going to happen twice, is quite common. However, there are those who believe in something called panchromaticism, and that is that it's always going to happen, or history keeps repeating itself over and over again. And one of the reasons I think panchromaticism exists is because sometimes God says something twice, and that is really significant. And so as we look at, and we're going to go back to the story of Elisha shortly, we see that not only is he Elijah times 2, but he asks God for a double portion of the spirit of Elijah. That's so significant to me, and it's going to be significant to you as you focus on the different templates that we see in the Bible. Things are going to come out again and again, and they're going to be pretty exciting. So God bless. See you in the next video.